Hi there, everyone. Welcome again to everyone around the world. I'll let our moderator kick us off, our WebEx person kick us off.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I want to go ahead and, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. So now you will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send your questions in at any time. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. With that, I would now like to introduce Twan Jansen, who is the Senior Supply Chain Expert, and also Adrian Wood, who's our Strategic Business Development Director at DELMIA. All right, I'll go ahead and let you take it away.
All right, thank you very much for that. Welcome again to everyone around the world listening in to our presentation on optimizing human resources and reintegration into the workplace with myself and Twan Jansen. If we think about what we're going to listen to today in the context of our overall framework of sustainable operations, then really, you know, where we fall into in this particular scope of what we're talking about is the value network and the elements of profit. And the value network, you know, we think about in terms of collaboration, decision support, lean operations, and one of the key elements of the value network beyond machinery and parts and material is obviously people. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Twan, who's going to talk about this important aspect of the value network.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to the moderator. Also, what I would like to do this afternoon is talk about sort of two things. First, in Dassault Systèmes, we currently have an initiative going, I guess like many other companies in the world, that is how to bring our people back to the office. What we've been doing in the last few months is to see how our own DELMIA Quintic planning solutions can facilitate that process. What I want to do today is first talk a little bit about our product called Workforce Planner, because I know in the audience today we do not only have Quintic customers, but also DELMIA customers, and introduce you a little bit to the concept of workforce planning and how we support that with our Workforce Planner product. And then secondly, take you through the approach we've taken with what we call back to the office team planning, how we bring people back to the workplace with all the constraints that we have in the current times. Right. And that is in fact what you see here. So an overview of the topics of today. My name is Twan Jansen. I've been working with originally Quintic, now Dassault Systèmes, over 16 years. Especially in the last years, I've worked a lot with customers in workforce planning in many different domains, like rail industry, broadcasting, air traffic control, airports, all doing different types of workforce planning, and working with many of those over the years. That's also why today I'm enjoying to present how we can supply these solutions not only to our customers, but also to different types of industries, which in this case is ourselves at Dassault Systèmes for the back to the office team planning. So if you look at the challenges in workforce planning, first of all, obviously the product is designed to help this process, and what we try to do is help our customers overcome problems that they see in the planning of large workforces. And as a company, DELMIA Quintic is doing many different types of planning and optimization, as you may know. So workforce planning is one, but we also have a large group of customers in manufacturing, supply chain planning, logistics planning. Workforce planning is a little bit different. So on the one hand, it's all about you have a demand, you have supply, you have resources, you have rules that limit which resources you can allocate to what types of demand and so on. But with machines, it's relatively easy. It becomes a matter of describing what the rules and the restrictions are, and then just creating a plan. Machines will not complain if they have to work 24 hours a day. With people, it's a bit different. So there's on the one hand similarities in planning with the other industries that we are supporting. But if you talk about people, there are additional considerations that you have to take into account. I mean, one, it's on the bottom of the list here, but in fact, the people in your company are the ones that are meeting your customers. So many of our customers are telling us that if our employees are happy, they also bring that satisfaction across to the customers, which is for some of our clients, for example, in airports where you are meeting customers and your reputation is very important. It's also essential that your people are happy because that gives them a positive impression of your company as well. But there's also other aspects. People change skills and change interests. So where people grow in their career, but also where your activities as a company change, you will see that the plan and the balance you created for 1 year may not be the same as next year, because people want to do different things maybe, or they get trained, they make career moves, and they change their competences. And finally, there's also a lot of aspects when it comes to regulation. So people have, of course, limitations in how many hours per day they can work. They need breaks in their shifts. There are industries that do 24-hour activities. You also have to take into consideration the rest between 2 working days. So many of those aspects also are captured in regulations, either by law for a country or by agreements between the company and the employees. All of these regulations also have to be taken into account to ensure that that you comply with the rules when creating a plan. Yeah, I guess here are some other examples of that. So on the one hand, you have demands, what your customers want to do. On the other hand, you have what people can do and how you can then create an optimal, basically, plan for those people. So we looked at some of these challenges before. Here is a different view of those challenges. Some of them I've mentioned before. Maybe again, a topic that is particular to employees is the idea of preferences, where people will have to, on the one hand, know about their schedule in advance. You cannot explain to your employee only for tomorrow when they are expected at work. At the same time, in that time between publishing the plan and actually being at work, things may change, and people may want to influence the plan, may want to make short-term changes because they have on short term some things, but even on the longer term preference that you want to take into account. And by doing that, you again support the employee satisfaction aspect of the plan, which makes a happier workforce and could have a positive effect on the happiness of your people. If you don't do this, then some companies are different amongst each other, but if you are less able to satisfy such employee preferences, you may find that employees prefer to work with a different company. So this is also indirectly a way of say enriching and empowering your workforce and making it that they can enjoy working for your company. So these are all things that are not even related to the idea of creating a planning system to help them, but these are the things around the concept of workforce planning that we like to help our customers with. So obviously, as a product organization, we can help with a planning solution, a planning system. So what do we typically find when customers talk to us? What is the situation that they are in before actually selecting these kinds of products? Often, and you may recognize some of these, of course, companies make plans before talking to the Dassault Systèmes. Often you see that such plans are created in silos, where different departments look at different aspects of the plan, often using homegrown tools or sometimes Excel, or not sometimes, quite often we see Excel being used as a planning tool. But that means often you have different versions of the plan, you have different aspects of the plan managed by different people that are not really connected until you email the Excel to the next person who then looks at it. So that also has an effect on the process. It goes on in steps. It often takes a lot of time. You discover mismatches in the plan a bit later. So a lot of manual steps also in these processes of checking errors by hand, moving information between people by hand. And as a result, of course, companies are creating a plan, but is it the best plan? Often there's not time to actually make the plan better. You are under time pressure to even deliver the plan. So there's not even a time or a possibility to review, are we able to do better? Are we able to create plans that satisfy those employee preferences in a better way? Or are we able to improve the productivity of our people in a better way? Time is simply not there. and you just have to publish the plan and get it out the door. Final topic, maybe you may be in a situation today where the planning process as you are supporting it now works fine, but a lot of the customers that we meet are actually in a changing environment. So the way they do plans today may not be the way they do it in 6 months or 12 months from now. And again, the current time with COVID-19 is actually quite a nice example of that, because in planning, you all of a sudden see new expectations, new rules, new things that have to be taken into account. And that is also something that your planning system should be able to support, so that you are able to deliver a plan that can actually support and satisfy all the regulations, all the rules that you need to have covered. So as I said, for that we have a solution called Workforce Planner. It has been in use since many years. In fact, I mentioned I worked with the company for a long time. I think in the early years of my career, we already started delivering early versions of Workforce Planner to customers. And since that time, it has been developed and fine-tuned for many different industries. But in its essence, it is a solution that covers the end-to-end process of workforce planning. So let's have a quick look at what that means. What you see here is the basic process of workforce planning, and some little screenshots of how that is supported in Workforce Planner. And what you typically see, if you look at different industries, you may all be from different industries today, the central part of the process is often quite similar to the many industries that we meet. So in the end, when you talk about workforce planning, what we do is create a schedule for a certain amount of time, typically a month ahead or maybe 3 months ahead. And in that schedule, you need to define what days are people at work and what days do people have time off, when do they have their annual leave, but also if they have a working day, do they have an early morning shift, an afternoon shift, a night shift, and so on. So these are the basic concepts that you have to deal with. And in addition, you can also look at what happens within that shift. So if you look at, for example, an airport, and you look at the ground operation staff, then people can be working at the check-in desks, people can be working at the gates, helping people to board the aircraft. So there are different activities during the day at different locations. And also these concepts of activities are part of the process of workforce planning. And the deviation, the variation you see is when you look after which aspect. And that's what I said. In the center part, it's usually the same, because then you look at the rosters, what is the working day and a day off for people. Those things are generally common across all the industries. If you look at the demand side of things, the starting point of the whole process, there you often see differences happening. So if you again look at the airport, typically in planning a workforce process for airports, you do not specify 3 months ahead exactly at what terminal, in what building, for which flight somebody checks in the passengers, but you do know approximately how many flights are expected at what time of the day. So what would happen there is you create a demand, as you see it here, based on demand curves. So you see peaks in the day and you see low points in the day, and you do that by role. So you need certain supervisors, you need gate agents, you need check-in agents, and this information helps you to get an understanding of the demand. And then you can say, okay, I need 5 morning shifts, 8 afternoon shifts, 2 night shifts on a particular day to cover that workload, to cover that demand. If you look at other industries, for example, the rail industry, typically the timetable of a rail company is relatively stable for an entire year. You know exactly what trains are going to run at what times. So often in the rail world, you see that in the demand side of things, they are actually creating shifts precisely to ensure that all the activities are covered. In other words, all the trains have a driver. That question is already covered in the early stages of the planning process. So from the demand, basically, what shifts do I have for which roles? You can then create rosters, meaning you can sequence those shifts over the various workdays and several weeks in a row to ensure that you can create kind of like a blueprint of a roster, which means for a certain team of people, what day is a work day, what shift is a person expected to do, and is there a day off or is there a working day? So you're not looking at the individual people yet, but simply I have a team of 20 people, I have maybe 50, 70 shifts. Can I plan all those shifts in that team still satisfying people's regulations like 2 days off per week, no more than 36 hours per week, and so on. That is what you basically cover here. So then the process continues. I'll not cover each little bit in detail, but once you have the blueprint of a plan, you also need to look in annual leave to make sure that people get their leave. And also here there is a decision to be made. People may want to give certain preferences or multiple options, and you can then decide, do you allocate the first option of an individual or the second option to ensure that you have enough people in the various periods of the year to do all the work. We then move to the more shorter term horizon. So the schedule is often about a fixed time, could be 4 weeks, could be a calendar month, where you look at the more short-term changes. People may have short-term leave, people may be on training. So all these things are taken into account. And what you do here is basically achieve a situation where the plan for, let's say, 1 month is completely finished, is free of conflicts, and unless anything changes in the real world, can be executed as it is in the plan. But that is basically the idea of this schedule phase. Then we look at activity assignments. Again, depending on the industry, that is done afterwards or maybe sometimes earlier. But in this case, it's illustrated here as here. So again, the example of the airport, what you typically see is that people get a schedule based on shifts for, let's say, a month ahead. And then a few days in advance, when you have the exact details of the flight operations, you can then determine what activities do we need to staff and which person is going to be at what terminal building, at what check-in desk, and so on. So that is then a process that is often done a few days in advance. And these activities are then assigned to the shifts that people already have. Finally, day of operations. Again, things will change. You cannot make a plan that never changes. So it's also essential that once the operations are ongoing, that you are still able to support the process of making sure that on the one hand, people have the right things to do, but also if conflicts are happening, that you can quickly fix them and make sure that the service also gets delivered. So that you have people at the gate helping passengers so that the flight does not run into a delay, or somebody calls in sick and you need to find somebody else. So that is also an aspect that is supported by the Workforce Planner product. You see also in the mobile app, you work with people, so it's also quite important that people are part of the whole planning process. So Workforce Planner also makes sure that people can interact with the planning process via the app. So they can enter their leave requests, they can put their preferences through. They also see what their schedule is. So that is also an aspect of making the whole process much more efficient than what you often see traditionally, people getting their schedule by mail or even informed by their managers. And this is simply a way of making that whole process much more interactive and efficient. So what does that mean for a particular customer? So if you're thinking of, could this be something for me? You probably are not going to deploy this entire process one-to-one in your organization. As I mentioned, it really depends on the way you run this process, but also some customers, of course, have certain parts of this process already covered by other solutions, which would then mean we would integrate these steps. Different perspective, more of a product approach. Solving a planning puzzle is never something in isolation. Planning is always in a broader perspective with other solutions. If you look particularly at workforce planning, the classical setup of a workforce planning tool means that you need interfacing with an HR system, because you need to know what the people are, you need to know what the skills of people are. Often the process of leave planning is actually done in the HR system, so you would simply move the already agreed annual leave and daily leave to the workforce planner system. And the other aspect is demand. You need to know the workload that needs to be covered by your staff. So there is a demand system and different types of these exist. It could be as simple as an Excel list that shows workload by hour on the day, or it could be as sophisticated as a timetabling system in a rail company that produces all the activities, meaning the trains that have to be driven into the workforce planning system. Then, as you can see on the left, all those process steps that we saw before are supported in Workforce Planner. Obviously, underlying this whole thing is a rule engine that validates all the rules, the labor rules, but also other rules that are part of this, to ensure that if you are creating a plan that you know it is feasible later on because you have satisfied all the rules. And the other aspect on the right is the employee portal, where you can see the types of things that people can do in the mobile app. Simply on your mobile phone, you can look at what your schedule is for next month. You can also indicate preferences, or some companies even allow flexibility when people themselves can modify the plan. So if you on short notice are not available on a certain day, you can go into the app and see, is there somebody else that can take over my shift, or we can maybe swap 2 shifts. And this can be done without involvement from the manager or the central planning team, by people doing that themselves. All of these things are covered here. And then in the end, typically, once a workday is completed, the actual, so the work that gets done, potentially some overtime, or the actual finish time of the employee, is then exported to an external system, often a payroll system, which is then used for, of course, calculating the salary components, the overtime payments, and so on that would apply. Just some examples of how workforce planning is as a concept used in many different industries in different ways. So I've given you some examples already. Maybe one more example on the top right. If you look at broadcasting, this is what we would call multi-resource planning. So it's not just about planning the people, but if you send a recording team on site to capture an event, it is not just about the journalist or the camera operator. You also have to bring a vehicle, you have to bring the camera itself. So there's different aspects that have to be planned together, and this is also something that you often see in workforce planning, and that's also supported through the workforce planner product. A very short demo, just to give you a flavor of what workforce planner looks like. The scenario here is day of operations in an airport, and the situation is we have a plan that you see on the top left, where multiple people have been assigned work. The green boxes are shifts, the dark green are the activities that represent either a check-in activity in the central building or a gate support activity close to the aircraft itself. And what is happening is that, of course, flight schedules may change. So on the top bottom left, you can see a very short list of flights where in the box aircraft delays have been made available. So we have been made aware that certain flights are delayed. And of course, that means that people that were supposed to finish an activity, then move somewhere else for a different activity, will have to stick around longer at the check-in desk or the gate, causing an overlapping activity with something else, which you see on the right. What Workforce Planner does here is use an optimizer to basically continuously identify such problems, and without involvement of the user, fix them in a predefined time window. So you will not do that probably for the next hour, because you then want to be in immediate contact with the employees, but a little bit more ahead, the optimizer will automatically detect the problems, find solutions, and continuously ensure that the problem is free of errors. So if we look at the bigger picture, again, you recognize the shifts and the activities in the big Gantt chart. On the left, due to the resolution, it's a bit small, but you see the shifts of people at the top and the activities in the shifts. And at the bottom, you see all the flights that are expected currently with the activities that are created for those flights, which is then a check-in activity or a gate activity. Be careful, it's really a short exercise. The optimizer is relatively efficient. So you'll see some errors appearing in the sense of overlapping activities. And then you'll see a few times that the optimizer will fix those by basically reassigning activities between people, sometimes shortening activities so that all the problems can be resolved. Let's have a look. You see on the right, the red indicators mean that a conflict has occurred. You see on the top left KPIs that are monitoring the quality of the plan. Of course, flight updates keep coming in a typical airport situation. More problems, bigger delays, more conflicts. And again, the optimizer simply looks at them, tries to find alternatives, reassigns the tasks until the problem is again under control, and the operations can continue as scheduled. Just a short example of what Workforce Planner looks like for a day of operations perspective, and one of the capabilities being the continuous optimizer. So now that we've looked at the Workforce Planner as a basic product, again, typically used for external customers, we have now a new situation where Workforce Planner brings in some additional expectations or workforce planning, or the looking at your staff. The same things still apply. People have working days, rest days, and so on. However, what you see, and that is also what we have been discussing internally, is that offices cannot be used at full capacity yet. So on the one hand, there is the aspect of maybe only allowing 25% of the people in. But that's not the only thing. You do not have a, let's say, a simple mathematical numerical puzzle in finding random groups of 25% of your people. You also have to look at other things. For example, what is a good team to bring together? If you have an R&D department like we do ourselves, you do not only want all of your software developers in the office, you also want testers, you want project managers, team managers. So typically it is about, on the one hand, the capacity constraints on the office space. It is what is an optimal group of people that you want to bring together. Then there are also in each country different government rules, what is allowed, things like how many people can be in a certain space. There is also other related aspects like, do you have an open floor plan, or do you have offices with a small number of desks? Do you allow maybe only 25% of your people in the office, but you also have to look at, you cannot bring them all together on the same floor. So there's different dimensions and different hierarchical levels of workspace restrictions that you also have to take into account. And then there's the new aspect for everybody, that a lot of home working has been done, schools have been closed. So where people normally have facilities to be able to come to the office, there are new situations where people have two working parents, children are at home. So you cannot simply go home and go to work and leave your children at home. So there's also individual situations that have to be taken into account to make sure that the plan actually would work when creating that for the staff. And finally, not mentioned here on this overview, but typically if we look at our customers, they plan for relatively long periods. You create a schedule for a month, or you look at seasonal planning for an airport. Here, things may change on a week's notice. The government may introduce new rules, or you may be allowed to increase from 25% to 40% of office. So where we are used to creating schedules and scenarios for maybe a longer time, you have to create a lot more scenarios that are following up on each other much more quickly. So there's also an element of workforce planning that needs to be taken into account. So what have we done? The process that we have discussed and now implemented is that the whole planning, the resilience planning, is based on three, let's say, layers. One is site level planning, which basically means you do not look at all the individuals aspects, but you look at, what does my office look like? What are the typical roles of people that I want to bring together? And can I do that while ensuring that all the rules have been followed? What you don't know here is the exact details of the individual person, the exact detail of each project team. You may have projects that are more under time pressure. You may have projects that are less in time pressure. So all these things are important, but that is not yet handled at the site level. Those aspects come into play when you look at the team level planning. So then you are assuming that the people creating the plan are more knowledgeable of the specific details of the work and of the people. So maybe you look here at a group of maybe 50 people in one part of the office, where you do have this, to a certain extent, what we call soft knowledge, so things that may not even be known in the planning system, but that are important. It could be that certain teams have they are in a creative process and they benefit from being together at a whiteboard, whereas other persons are more in the testing phase and they can do a lot of that at home. Those kind of things can be considered at the team level. And then finally, the employee level, which is all about communicating, because again, plans are changing quickly, so you want to have an efficient way of communicating, but also you want to quickly know when people's personal situations change, so that you can take that into account with the planning process. So this is the high-level process. This is basically the same story with some screenshots, and I'll show some more later on how this is supported. But basically the idea is that on site level, you depend quite a lot also on optimization. So this is in fact an iterative process where a plan is created for, let's say, the next, not even the next two, but maybe you would assume that the next 2 weeks are already created as a plan. And the weeks after that, maybe 2-3 weeks, is the next phase of the rollout. And that can then be created on the site level, where you run an optimizer, you review the results, you see if you can have any additional changes, or maybe some managers provide some input in terms of I want to have more availability for my team. Others say, well, my team doesn't have to be on site that much. So there's still an element of making steps to create a plan. But at some point, this plan is frozen and then handed over to the team level, where you look at a shorter time frame, maybe 2 weeks, and then start looking into the small time, short-term revisions before then publishing out to the employees and interacting with the employees. So some details on that. Site focus, the master plan. Maybe some business questions. What are the typical things that goes on in the minds of the planners? And we saw that also ourselves. And lots of discussions about how can we deal with the constraints. For example, if we want to bring a lot of people to the office, should we not have 2 shifts where some people can come in very early in the morning and leave at, let's say, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and other people come in at 1 o'clock and finish at 8 o'clock? Is that an option? So all these things can be considered, and you can evaluate scenarios to see what the ideal setup would be for a particular time frame. But you can also do scenarios like we have 25%. What happens if all of a sudden we're allowed to have 50% of the people in the office, and then what would that look like? So this allows you to have a view of what is possible, not just to create the plan, but indeed also to review multiple scenarios to see what the ideal setup would be for a particular company, under the understanding that this is a quickly changing environment. So the system is not able to produce the plan on its own. It also depends on interactions, people reviewing the plan, fine-tuning input parameters, and so iteratively coming to a plan that's acceptable to everybody. A quick screenshot. What you see here is basically the output, just a way of visualizing what an optimizer has produced. So you see at the top, we have a goal of 25% occupancy. In the center, you can see per grouping, which can be a role, can be a building, can be a floor. How much of the capacity are we using? Are we overusing? So you can then review the quality of the plan. And in this case, the plan is a little bit optimistic because it has assigned in the dark green certain shifts for which there are no, let's say, spaces. You cannot have 7 people, you can only have 5. So this plan is not finished yet, and it needs a few more iterations. Then it moves over to the employee scheduling. And this again is about the short term, where things may change. A customer has an important situation that needs to be fixed, so all of a sudden one team needs to be brought back to the office. These are the kind of things you can deal with in the shorter term. You would not know this 4 weeks in advance. So it's a different perspective, but it's still about who can be in the office, who cannot be in the office. One additional element here is that you are working more with what we've called local knowledge. So you have project importance, project priorities, people's individual situations that cannot all be captured in rules, but are still important to take into consideration. That is what's going to be taken into account in the employee scheduling in this part of the process. Again, a short video of what that looks like. So what you see here again is Workforce Planner. So we are using Workforce Planner for this as well. In the center part, all the green boxes are shifts, but they basically represent for a person the ability to come to the office. And at the bottom part of the screen, you will see we could call it the capacity or the potential for being in the office. It's now blank, which means all the capacity that is available is actually currently assigned to employees, which is also reflected at the top with the KPIs. They're all in green, all the shifts are assigned. But what happens now, the story is somebody calls in and says, actually, I don't know, my daughter is ill, or I'm not able to come to the office after all on Wednesday and Thursday. So that person makes that known to the manager, and the manager can then resolve this. And we should then find a new solution, but taken into account that this shift of a person that is working from a particular room in the building cannot be handed over to everybody, because it has to be, because of the social distancing rules and other regulations, there's only a limited group of people that is able to take over that shift. And that is what we show in this little scenario, unplanning those shifts and then finding people that are capable of replacing that or taking that room availability. So it starts with the unassigning, which basically means, as we call it, dropping them to the bank. And now you see them at the bottom. So there's now capacity available for someone else, but not for everybody. So the next step is to find qualified people, which means people that are maybe normally working in the same room. And then you see a short list, and then the planner actually assigns the available capacity to the people on that selected list. And that shows how quickly you can avoid that people leave, let's say, the potential to be in the office, and by giving that now to somebody else. The final step then is the interaction with the employees. Again, as I mentioned, this can be done through a mobile app. Can also be done through other integrations. Of course, many options exist, but basically the idea here is to facilitate efficient and quick interaction in two directions. So on the one hand, if a new schedule is available, you want to let your people know as soon as possible what the situation looks like for, let's say, next week. But also the other way around, if people are no longer able to come to the office, or the other could also be that they say, I have an important project meeting, I want to be with my team, can I come to the office after all? Also, these kind of short-term things can be entered through the mobile portal, so that then on the desktop that we saw in the previous video, they would immediately appear as requests or as preferences, so that the users of that system are aware of any new input that arises. Again, some examples are mentioned of the typical things that are going on here, but this is really about communicating with the employees and keeping them engaged and informed. I've also noticed this myself. It's just good to know when the office opens, what the situation is going to look like. A lot of people have questions, and this is one way. Of course, many other aspects are needed as well, is to keep your employees engaged and informed about what the plan looks like for the return to the office. So with that, one more thing, quick view on the mobile device, just to see maybe on the right, you can see if this would be my schedule. It means that Monday, Tuesday, I'm supposed to work at home, and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I have a place in the office. I can come to the office, and that is what I can then see on my mobile device. So with that, we're coming to the end. Again, the solution is basically based on existing products from DELMIA Quintic, but we've been able to use them to a large extent and with some specifics for COVID-19, capacity per room, floor, or building, just so that we are able to create a plan that is as normal a plan that is feasible, follows all the regulation, but also takes the new COVID-19 situation into account. So that as a company, you are staying in control of the return to the office, with all the effects on the employees that it has, and being able to stay in control also if things are changing all the time, because you basically have a full view and all the information that's being exchanged is handled through a central system that is available to everybody. And that wraps up my story for today. So hopefully it was a good introduction. I think it's what I also always enjoy, is to be able to explain how we are using our solutions ourselves, which is always a good test case, and I think it worked out quite nicely in this activity in the last 2 months. We're using it now on a daily basis for managing the process of returning Dassault staff to the offices. Actually, it started in France, but meanwhile we are using this in many other countries as well, for preparing for. Some countries are not yet in a situation where they return to the office, and in other places it's already ongoing. So thanks a lot, and hope you enjoyed this presentation. Looking forward to feedback.
All right, thank you very much, Tuan, for that. And what we'll do, just while we're getting ready to answer some questions, please go ahead and submit your questions. We have a few stacked up and we have some time to answer questions. But before we get there, let me just talk about a couple of things very quickly about the DELMIA User Champion Program and our communities. This is a great way to network with your peers, with other experts, with the DELMIA ecosystem. A fantastic way to learn more, and also for you to help educate and inspire others as well. So we'd very much like to make you aware of this if you're not already. If you'd like more information about this, you can reach us at delmia.com or shoot us an email at delmia.useradvocacy@3ds.com. This is also the place where you'll find the replays for the presentations that you're listening to, and specifically the community that this topic is a part of is the DELMIA Planning and Optimization community. So that's where you'll find the replay for the specific topic that we're talking about right here. So with that, if we can move to the last slide, we will get to a few questions. And if you have any specific questions that we run out of time to answer, then please send them to delmia.cs2020@3ds.com or go to go.3ds.com/delmia for any other information you might have about customer stories. But let's get into some of the questions. So first question, a question about how the KPIs are measured in Workforce Planner when we optimize the plan and schedule. So Tuan, what's your thoughts on that?
KPIs, yes. So there were a few on the screen indeed in the demo. So typically, of course, there's several KPIs that are competing, and an optimizer finds a certain balance. So I guess the first thing to recognize is that if you have KPIs, then an optimizer would have the KPIs, but it would also be configured to have a certain weight factor for each KPI to make certain KPIs more or less important. So sometimes you want to find very productive plans. In other cases, you want to focus a bit more on employee preferences, and that's what you can change. The actual definitions of the KPIs itself are usually customer specific. So even though you have generic concepts like the percentage of productive work in a shift or the average number of working hours in a week, customers still have unique things that they want to focus on. So in projects, we would typically work with customers to define and refine those calculations to ensure that the KPIs that are in the system are aligned with the company goals that are often part of projects related to workforce planning.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for that. Next question is, how does this tool differ from DELMIA Autumns, which also optimizes schedules for employees based upon availability and skill set? And perhaps I'll take that since I know a little bit about both of the solutions. DELMIA Autumns is our production planning and scheduling solution. I think the difference, just back to what Tuan said about KPIs and some of the attributes and constraints that we use in Quintig, is part of that difference. Autumns, yes, a very capable optimization tool for planning and scheduling, but very much more focused to a single facility and production planning and manufacturing specifically. So yes, we have skills related to employees, but they're very much related to the manufacturing process. And as you can see here, what we're talking about is applying Workforce Planner to a wider scope of problem, different KPIs, different business goals, and that's what really this solution is expert at, being able to capture those unique and specific constraints related to all sorts of different optimization, and in this case, workforce. So that's the difference between the two. One is very much sort of facility and manufacturing oriented, versus this solution can be applied to a wider variety of problems and constraints. Next question. Workforce Planner we've spoken about, is that part of DELMIA Quintig, or is it a standalone application? And what's the relative sort of licensing cost related to that?
So Quintig as a company became part of the Dassault in 2014. So since then, a lot of effort went into also making the Quintig technology part of the platform. And Workforce Planner is, I think, one of the solutions that is relatively early in the cycle. This is currently an ongoing process. So we're in the process of making it part of the platform. For now, not much longer. I think it is technically at least still an independent system. Although from a practical perspective, we are able and we have already delivered combined solutions. But again, we are in the process of integrating that. When it comes to cost expectation and so on, I think I would happy hand over to a phone conversation with a commercial person. That depends on many factors. I'm not able to answer that today in this discussion.
Okay, fair enough. One question related to our own use of the solution for the Dassault Systems purpose. How did it work out to use our solution? What were the results that we found and some of the lessons we learned?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, so I think it worked well. So interestingly, we have been discussing this a lot with people in the Dassault system that were not familiar with Quintig yet. So we went through a few cycles and learning curves that we see with other customers as well. Understanding not just what the technology can do, but in workforce planning, there's also, I guess, soft factors in how you plan, how you communicate. So there was a lot of getting to know each other in the beginning, but we have now achieved a situation where we started with this concept in France for the R&D departments, but relatively quickly we were also able to ramp up to other sites around the world. So I think we see now the ability to have a pretty good overview of various locations in a central system. And being able to quickly, so what happens a lot, you make a plan, you show it to the managers, they provide feedback to see if it's what they expected. So we are able relatively quickly to fine tune and enhance a plan until it stabilizes, at which point it can be handed over to the employees for letting them know when they come to the office. I think the central transparency is a good effect. The ability also to cover all the rules. This is important for the government often, that you can only open an office if you can prove that you satisfy all the rules, the hygienic rules and so on. So this is also a benefit of a system like that, where you can centrally say, this is the plan, this is how we deal with the rules, and that you're safe to open an office by looking at this plan. I think that's also a good effect of this whole exercise.
Okay, and one other question related to that planning for ourselves at Dassault Systems. The question was, do we have open floor plan offices or rooms or cubicles, and how does this affect the process, and how is it captured in the optimization?
Right. Yeah. So I think interesting. Yeah. So these kind of small details can have an interesting effect on what a good plan looks like. And in France, a lot of people do actually work in rooms, in offices, whereas in India, for example, there's more open floor spaces. It's also a bit so first of all, in the rooms you have a smaller limitation. As you could say, I have 500 people that can work in an office. I'm only allowed to have 25% of my seats filled. But if you look at the specifics of a room, also within a room, you can have a limit. So you cannot have a room with 10 desks. You cannot have 5 people in one room and only 1 in the other. So the average is okay. You have to look at each room individually, because otherwise people would be too close together. So the detail level that you have to look at, at what level you apply a rule makes a difference. In that case, and yeah, obviously that is something that is relatively easy to capture with the tools that we have. So we were able to do that, but it also showed that the first plan that we rolled out could not immediately also be used in other locations when we learned about different setups of the office spaces.
Okay, thank you. All right, we are running a little bit over time here, so if you've asked a question and we have not been able to get to it, we will respond to all of them and contact you directly. We certainly appreciate your time. Again, if you have any additional questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, please send them to delmia.cs2020@3ds.com. We'll endeavor to answer all of them. And look for other sessions for the questions that came in around DELMIA Autumns. We have plenty of other sessions on the calendar for the next few days related to production planning and scheduling. So if you're interested, there are plenty of other sessions and content that you might be interested in. With that, I will thank everyone for their time and attention on this important and very current topic. And we look forward to connecting with you either through the communities or later on this week. Thank you very much for your time.